This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good morning and welcome to the Monday Morning Break with me, Marie. I am delighted to be welcoming Liz this morning, and we're going to talk about the barriers to attendance. So join us and listen in.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So good morning everyone, and I hope that you are all safe and well following the storms last night, and you've all managed to travel where you need to go, and there wasn't any damage out there. It was very loud where we were, but yeah, thankfully everything was fine. So as I said, I'm really happy to have Liz join us this morning. So good morning, Liz. Hopefully, are you there, Liz?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Right. Oh, hello. Oh, hi. So it made me jump in my headphones. Good morning, Liz. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good, thank you.
Oh, good. Right. So, as I said, we are going to talk about some of the barriers to attendance. There has been a lot of talk about this on certainly on X, but I think in workplaces, in places of education. So the government has launched its Moments Matter Attendance Counts campaign recently, with the aim of driving up attendance figures and tackling persistent absence. This has been met with views, hasn't it? I think it's fair to say. I mean, nobody is saying that children, young people shouldn't be attending school, but I think certainly from perhaps the circles I'm in and the accounts I follow and so on, it has been raised that it is a little bit more complicated than that, and that perhaps sometimes there are reasons for that absence. So yeah, and Liz, obviously you were someone that we connected on this subject, and you were willing to come on and talk about it this morning. So if I just shall I just introduce you, and then perhaps we could talk about your background a bit?
Yes, that sounds a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got here that you are, Liz is an experienced lead in education and has over 25 years of working with autistic young people and their families. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, amazing area to work in, and you have a lot of experience. Are you able to kind of tell us a little bit about your background and sort of the roles that you've had in that time?
Yes, I started in mainstream primary education, and quite shortly into my career, I met a young boy who was quite severely autistic, and his parents wanted him to come into mainstream.
Right.
It was difficult for him. It was difficult for me because, as with, well, particularly when I trained, there was very little education for the teachers about autism. But having him in my class was definitely a steep learning curve. Since then, I would say that while I was in primary education, most classes had some children who would have been on the spectrum. I then moved, I did a master's in special educational needs at Bristol University, and I moved into working in special education. So I first of all worked in a school for moderate learning difficulties, secondary. Then I actually worked in an international school for 2 years with trying to set up their special needs department, which is that a lot of international schools don't have much input into special needs. And then I worked at an outstanding special school for autism in Woking called Fremantle School. Following that, I have my last challenge that was in 2020. I opened a school in Basingstoke called the Austin Academy, which was for children with autism, higher functioning. I don't really like that term, but had been in mainstream but couldn't cope with the stresses and strains of mainstream, and were needing a school that would provide a broad curriculum and very high anxiety in amongst that cohort. So that's sort of a potted history of where I've been.
Yeah, I mean, what a varied history, and so many amazing experiences. So, were you abroad for the international school? I
Yes,
don't
I
know if
was
that's a
in
silly
Prague.
question.
Yeah, I was in
Ah,
Prague for 2 years. I had an autistic boy in my class to start with, and then we worked on developing their special needs offer. There were several children who were autistic. There were no special schools for that sort of international population. Very different views in different countries about what you do with children with special needs. So it was an English speaking school, and I had a young Dutch boy who was bilingual, but really amazing experience there. And I
yeah,
did a
sounds.
lot with English as a second language at that point as well. So there's quite a lot of similarities when you have a breakdown of communication because you can't speak the language.
Well, yeah. I think that's another whole show in itself, isn't it? A kind of
Yeah.
international special educational needs provision. Yeah. So, and yeah, really interested. So, you've got obviously you started. You said you started in mainstream primary, and then progressed and you did your masters and in SEN, and then obviously worked in SEN schools. So I think, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when we're talking about attendance and so on, I mean, certainly in a mainstream primary, you must have felt that pressure, on attendance, and I mean, potentially there is a little better understanding to some of the barriers to attendance in SEN settings. So yeah, I think you've got a comparison of both sort of ends, haven't you? I suppose.
Yes, and I do think things have changed since COVID. There's definitely an increase in persistent absence, but I think there's reasons for that. In that children learned that they could be educated at home, um,
Yes,
and I
yes,
think that's particularly for children who find the school environment very difficult to bear. They realise that actually there was another choice, and I think that's quite significant.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so if we go on to talk about this. So as I said, the government has launched its Moments Matter attendance counts campaign, and some of the statistics and figures that have come out of this, are interesting. So, like you said, I think some of it was exacerbated by COVID. There are a proportion of young people and pupils that sort of haven't really made it back significantly after COVID. And actually, one of the figures is that in 2021-22, more than a quarter of secondary school pupils were classed as persistently absent. So persistently absent being missing out at least 10%. So that is a quarter. That is a big number. And now tackling persistent absence and getting pupils back into school has been named as the top priority by Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary. So, I mean, some of it, in my view, some of it, the campaign and the support that's being put in sounds valuable. They're talking about putting these a pilot program in where attendance mentors will be sort of working with children who are persistently absent and helping them back into school. I mean, I think a very important point that somebody made actually when I was talking about this is that the attendance figures themselves, or attendance itself, isn't the problem, but poor attendance is signalling there's a problem. And you can't actually make that problem go away by just forcing them to attend. So I thought that was a very interesting one. So in your experience then, Liz, so what are some of the barriers to attendance that you've been familiar with?
Um, Having been head teacher for the last 3 years of the Autism Academy, I think one of the really significant issues is the not understanding the barriers within mainstream secondary schools. So it's not just about them coming to school. There's a huge stress on them for them to attend school. You've got to think about the cause, and they're really focusing on the cause and listening to what actually is causing the problem. If people with autism have to keep going into a situation which impacts their sensory difficulties and being told that they have to just get used to it, that isn't going to solve the problem at all. I think that if you actually start thinking about how many of us would really be happy. Lots of people who are at work now have hybrid working opportunities, and that's not available for children. Well, it's starting to be. There's a couple of schools that have just been registered, I think, for hybrid working.
Yes.
It's really
Yeah,
exciting.
I read about one of those
Yeah,
actually the other day.
and I
Yeah.
think that it's particularly now when they see their parents working from home sometimes, they've had opportunities to work from home. And then they're forced to go into a situation where, right from arriving in the mass of children, if you've got schools of over 1,000, the number of people who are arriving at the same time as you, and there's in secondary schools, children can get detentions and things for being late. They can get. There seems to be a lot of punishment that the children with autism that have come to my school have told me about. That they're in sort of dread of being told off. I had a parent who was told, and this was a school that had an autism hub in it, so they should have. I don't know. I don't. I only know one side of the story, but he was told to put his child over his shoulder and carry him in if he wouldn't get out of the car. And I
Yeah,
think
that's something that we've heard.
that
Yeah.
is so traumatic for any parent and the child. I've got another family who I tried to support. I had 3 girls who were supposed to be on my roll for school, and I feel a certain amount of guilt now because I was trying to do what I was told in that they had to come to school and we were trying to do what they needed, but what they needed was something that wasn't a school provision. So,
Yeah.
if you don't like people and you have to have continuity, schools quite often don't have continuity because people are away. The person that you've allocated them as their support worker is sick, so then they get someone different at the last minute. It's really, really hard to keep that consistency. And if they've had a big problem with trust based on the fact that consistency has not been there in their previous secondary school, it's really hard to mend. And I think that we're then pushing children into continuing to go to the place that they find hardest. I think that a lot of the children, when I was reading the stats, although they've got persistence absence, a lot of it is that they are away for more than 10% of the school week. I can understand that. People with autism find going to school very, very tiring. And so sometimes in the middle of the week, they actually are exhausted. I think also there's a little bit of the lessons. Some lessons you do wonder about the purpose of them when you're a teenager. And if you can read, write, and at home you can access everything through your computer that you want to learn, being told that you have to come in to do subjects that have no interest to you might well be a barrier, especially if it's in an environment that you find stressful. So I think there's a need to really identify places that are neurodiversity, they affirm that neurodiversity, and really think about what it is. And every person will be different. That's the other problem. But you can't. It's not as easy as putting in ramps for people who've got physical disabilities. You've got to find what their barriers are, and that in itself is hard for them to really identify what it is, and it takes time. So I had some success with children coming into school, but it took time. So there was one young person that I started off visiting at their house with my dog. They were stuck in their bedroom, and the dog got to know the person before I did. And then I made very clear that I was going to come on the same day of the week at the same time, and I did it through school holidays, and it took 6 weeks, and then that person was able to come and meet me at the school and just look at the outside of the school. And it took weeks and weeks and weeks for them to be able to come actually into the school building. That person still hasn't got 100% attendance, but it's something that I think the last time I heard it was 86%, which is amazing based on the fact that when they were in year 9, they were in a bedroom, not being able to go downstairs for a meal. So, it's some of the trauma that these people have had is quite intense. And I think
Yeah.
there's got to be that sympathy and empathy. And some of the media representation of the parents is not fair.
No.
That the parents are the ones, allowing their children not to go to school when actually they're protecting their children's mental health.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, there's a few. As I was listening to you, there was a few things that I was really sort of picking up on, and one was that the need for continuity, the need for building up trust, the need for consistency, and yes, for children or young people with SEN, but also, I mean, I think in general, I think a lot of people need that, whether whether they've got additional, an SEN need or not. And also, I think there is a slight little bit of a contradiction, isn't it? Then, we're saying you're trying to build consistency, and they have a support worker or a one-to-one, and who then might be off ill, which is going to impact, how that person. It's, illness and being off and circumstances are a fact of life. So, there is a little bit of an inconsistency there. The other thing that I was thinking, you were saying about detentions for being late and things like that. I mean, certainly, again, doesn't have to be SEN, but if you've got anxiety and things like that, if you are going to be late and you're going to get told off or a detention, it's probably easier to just say, I'm ill, I'm not going in.
Yeah.
I'm
not
so they
going
did
in at all.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than go in and have to get a detention and be told off, just not going in. There was actually there was some research done by Impact Ed, and it was saying the data shows that communicating clear consequences of non-attendance is actually insufficient.
Yes.
So it's that people are being rewarded for attendance, people are being given detentions, but it's all very inconsistent. And actually, the research said persistently absent pupils were almost as likely as pupils with 100% attendance to report consequences. So, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of inconsistency around it. The other thing I think, which is strikingly different, is a couple of weeks ago I went to a conference, and bearing in mind this was for high needs students, but what they were talking about is the measures of attendance should be and are often looked at comparatively. So exactly as you said, for example, you've got a young person who is not able to leave their bedroom and come downstairs to eat a meal, and over time, with time and trust and strategies. Loved that you took your dog. That's amazing. But over time, they've built up to looking at the school, coming in the school, to 86%, I think you said.
Yes.
So that is huge. But I guess, I do think it should be looked at that. So from 0 for however long up to 86 is a huge achievement. But it is under the 90% mark. So I guess she's still classed as persistently absent. And that, that does seem misjudged, I would say.
I think there's that is one of my sort of bugbears, is that they're not looking at how far the young people have come, but rather than the deficit. And I think
Yes.
there's also some of the things that are sort of the lack of ability to do something as a family, because you have to always, you can't get permission to take your child out of school is another thing. So you get people lying and saying their children are sick to be able to do family events. I'm not saying, I think there's a huge problem with cost of holidays, which is very
Yes.
unfair during the holiday. But it's the time that you could do, you have visitors from overseas or something, and you still are expected to send your children to school, even though that would be educational as well. I think there's times that sometimes it is the system, and I understand that they want to get numbers up. I think that to be in an education system where 20% have got persistent absence is a problem, but I think there's too much keeping the same education system as we've always had and not looking at other opportunities. I visited a young person who'd opted out of education at my previous school, and she was doing incredibly well at home with a very structured sort of education program that had been put in place for her at home, and school just wasn't a place she could concentrate. I also had a boy I was talking to his mother just last week, and he had moved from a mainstream school. He'd been absent for a long time, and then he'd been put in a special school. And he had a little rucksack on his back, but he wouldn't let me look at this, and he wouldn't get anything out. And I said to his mum, "What's in his rucksack?" She said, "Oh, his ear defenders. He was told off for using those in the previous school." And I think there's a huge lack of understanding of those sensory issues that even people who don't have autism have if they're very stressed. And how there's a lot of simple things that could be done that would make the sensory issues of school better.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And as you said, I mean, it is a lot of students and pupils missing a lot of education. I mean, that's
It's a
no, there's
fact,
no that's fact. Yeah. And it is key that attendance is looked at. Because it's important. Education is important, and I agree with all of that. But as you said, you can't really address it without looking at the reasons why, and what can be done to support some of them coming back in school. I mean, you were saying about home educating, and I think it's about 86,000 families are now electively home educating. Because for a variety of reasons, but some of them are going to be the fact that school is not an okay place for their child to go to. Especially when you bring in those, as you've mentioned a couple of times, mental health as well. So yeah, a rise in home education, as well as this drop in attendance figures at school. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to talk about, and it is a multifaceted issue. So yeah, we'll just go to the news, and then we will continue talking. So see you on the other side.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Ofsted finds itself in the news again As inspections paused for a 2-week period to allow inspectors to undertake mental health awareness training, begin again on the 22nd of January. ITV News shared the results of a survey of almost 2,000 school leaders, which showed that 97% support the removal of single-word judgments. The survey, carried out by NAHT Union, followed the outcome of the inquest into the death of Ruth Perry. The union has urged Ofsted to implement a number of changes, including a mechanism for school leaders to halt an inspection where an inspector's conduct falls below standards, extending the notice period schools receive for inspection, and asking them to revert to a process, however temporarily, of ungraded inspections similar to those conducted during the pandemic. Meanwhile, the BBC reports that Ofsted has apologised fully for the first time for the role it played in Ruth Perry's death. The apology came at the same time as Ofsted responded to the coroner's Prevention of Future Deaths notice. In the PFD response, new Ofsted chief Sir Martin Oliver said, "Such tragedies should never happen again," and that he apologised sincerely for the part inspection played in her death. Since the death of Mrs Perry, schools judged as inadequate on safeguarding alone are now re-inspected within 3 months. Ofsted also changed its confidentiality rules to allow heads to speak to colleagues, family, friends and health professionals about outcomes of inspections before the report is actually published. The Department for Education has committed to working with Ofsted to review things during a consultation in the spring, which it is calling the Big Listen. Education unions praised Ofsted's positive steps, but said they were only the beginning. The weather has been front and centre of the news this week, with schools across parts of Wales and Scotland being forced to close due to snow. Icy conditions and weather warnings made for tricky travel and forced school closures in areas badly affected. For those concerned that the post-pandemic impact of remote learning would mean the end of snow days, pictures on social media and local news proved that this was not always the case. But anyone worried that the icy blasts will last can be assured that the weather is set to return to normal over the next few days. Authors, including Sir Michael Morpurgo and Mallory Blackman, have written an open letter urging the government to invest in early years reading. According to a book trust survey, only half of children between 1 and 2 from low-income families are read to daily, with some families struggling to access books and being in need of support. The letter from authors is addressed to both Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, and says it is not right that children from poorer backgrounds are deprived of a life rich in reading. Sir Michael Morpurgo is president of the Charity Book Trust and helped launch their new campaign Get Reading to support disadvantaged children in family reading. He spoke on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, saying that the younger that children are introduced to the power of stories, the better chance there is of putting them on an extraordinary pathway of knowledge, understanding and empathy. He also said that books need to be free at the point of delivery, like the health service. A DFE spokesperson said, "We are committed to raising literacy for children," but Sir Michael said that these efforts are clearly not enough. Finally, The Guardian features an article which looks at research in America that appears to show that children learn better on paper than on screens. The research follows headlines across the pond which focused on the nationwide collapse in reading scores among American youths, citing a 4-point drop in the comprehension skills of 13-year-olds, falling below skill levels of 1971 for the worst performing students. Politicians appear to be assigning blame to the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns, with remote learning being labelled as bad for students by the Biden administration. Others blame teachers who they say lobbied for lockdowns. However, the article itself focuses on a new study by neuroscientists at Columbia University's Teachers College, which appears to show there is a clear advantage to reading a text on paper rather than on a screen, because it leads to what they describe as deeper reading. A sample of 59 children aged 10 to 12 were asked to complete a series of tasks, which led researchers to conclude that we should not yet throw away printed books and shouldn't rely on the digital revolution just yet. Further details can be read on the Guardian website. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Okay, so welcome back. Great, very interesting news there. I think I'm just writing down a note to look at that story on the Guardian, because really interested in that. I know I do better with reading on paper rather than on screen. I also like to sort of make notes and things like that. So yeah, I can understand that. I think the other thing to mention is very, very excited about the Bet Show this week, 24th to the 26th of January. So I will be there on the Wednesday along with Poppy Gibson and Tom Rogers. So yeah, anyone that's listening that's coming to the Bet Show, come and say hi to us. Poppy and I will be hoping to talk to as many people as we can from the Teacher Talk Radio stand. So yeah, really looking forward to that. And obviously as well, seeing all the other exhibitors and stands and finding out about what's new in education and technology. So yeah, looking forward to that. Right, so to return to the topic today on absence and barriers to attendance. So we've sort of talked, Liz, haven't we? We've talked about SEN. We've talked about the sensory environment of school. We've talked about, the fact that children and young people, post-COVID, and the world has changed a bit, a lot, but they might see that their parents are working from home. They themselves might have found working from home, remote learning, a lot better for them. And then we've talked about kind of issues with continuity within the school environment, and this thing about sanctions and detentions and so on, and attendance awards. So there are a lot of barriers. Can you think of any? I mean, the other one, I suppose, is illness as well. I mean, there was a story, wasn't there? There's a news story that was in the Independent that was saying, parents being told to just send them in if they've got a cold and so on. Which is, yeah, I know if my children are poorly, sometimes they just want to be at home, and it's the same as us, isn't it, as adults? If you're feeling really rotten, you don't really want to go into work, and also you don't really want to spread it around everyone else. So, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Are there other barriers that you think that we should discuss, or is there anything big that I've missed there?
I think there's a difference in things that children have to cope with. So I think the social media aspect, mobile phones, is something that is a problem. It's been a problem for a number of years. I remember having to make sure that all my children's phones were downstairs when they went to bed, because my daughter had some bullying that were, and things actually coming into your home, the sort of bullying that happens. Teenagers sometimes don't realise that they're being as nasty as they are, I don't think. But the fact that you can't get away from it now, I think, has a huge impact on mental health. I also think, but back to the sort of people working from home, I know if my husband is working from home, the routine is different. So when I was going to school, the routine of getting up, going to school was always the same. Everyone was busy, getting up, moving, and everything led to going to school. Whereas I think when parents are working from home, there is a different atmosphere in the morning. It's not quite the same routine. So that can impact on whether children want to go to school or not. And it's easier, if you're working from home, if someone does have a cold or something, you can actually manage that much more easily and keep them at home, can't you? Whereas,
definitely,
if everyone's going out to work, you go, just get on with it, have a lemsip, and
yes,
we are able to say, well, actually, you can have another half hour in bed and rest today and get rid of that horrible cold feeling, because there is nothing worse than going to school with a really bad cold.
Oh, it's horrible, isn't it? It's awful. Yeah, and you're right though. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that change in routine or just change in atmosphere, I suppose, in the morning is different, isn't it? If you're all rushing, I don't know, queuing for the bathroom, got to get out the door, and everyone's going off to work, it's sort of, I guess there's a momentum. But if it's a bit sort of, oh, I'm working from home today, so I'm just taking my time a little bit, I don't know, maybe some of that momentum is gone. You're right. And equally, yes, if you're parent, as a parent, if you've got a big day and you've got to be in work and so on, there is a tendency to be like, oh, you'll be fine, you'll be fine by break time, you just got to get in there. Whereas, like you said, if you could just be like, oh, it's fine, you'll have to stay quiet because I've got some meetings online, but you can stay here. Yeah, definitely. The other
Sorry, there's also the issue of sort of computer games and things like that. There's more distraction at home. I remember it being very boring staying at home because I couldn't talk to my friends. So I didn't, there's that element, is that you've got many more things you could do at home than you used to be able to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If I was ill when I was a child, I just had to stay upstairs, stay in bed, couldn't do anything. If you're ill enough to stay off school, you're not well enough to get up and do things. Oh, yes, yeah. Whereas, yeah, you're right. I mean, I know what I'm like if my children are ill. I don't do that.
It's a different ethos, isn't it?
It is.
There are things that they can be doing that they're not running around necessarily, so you feel that they're resting.
Yes, exactly.
I think that one of the things that concerns me about the sort of recent media campaigns, there is some blame being put on parents, and I do worry about that, because there are a lot of parents I've met who they're desperate for their children. They would like nothing better than their children to be in school, but instead they've got children who can't leave their bedrooms because their mental health is so poor. And to start sort of putting the pressure back on them is just wrong. We've got to look at what we're offering the families instead.
Oh, I totally agree.
There's a lot of focus with schools now that you go to litigation much quicker. And instead of working with, instead of working with those parents and really trying to build the trust up, instead you've had children off, the county or whatever are starting to say, well, there's a litigation team. And I don't think that litigating against children who've got mental health issues and they actually can't leave their bedrooms is a very empathetic and kind society.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the hope, I suppose, with these hubs, these attendance hubs that are being set up. I mean, it does say, it says that intensive one-to-one support is offered to pupils who are persistently absent, alongside work with their families to find out why the child is absent. So, I mean, that would be the hope, wouldn't it? Is rather than just sanctions and punishments and
if there's
fear
enough
of
money being put into it, I think yes, but it's that this is something that's not going to go away without funding being put into working, doing it properly. And
understanding, I think, as well. Like you said, the media representation is quite negative, and like you said, that really resonated when you said that you've worked with parents who would like nothing more than their children to go to school, and absolutely agree. We've had the same experience, and it is heartbreaking. And we've also heard the same stories that someone said, well, you've just got to get them in. You've just got, and the parent is saying, how can I? They're a 15-year-old boy, they're bigger than me or whatever, and highly distressing as well, for everyone, the child, the parent, the carer. I agree, there is blame being put on parents who.
The other thing that I've found, sorry I've interrupted you, is I've had parents who've been desperate for CAM support, and there isn't enough out there. And also sometimes with I've heard people saying to CAMS people saying, well, we're not skilled in working with people with autism, so we can't have our help. And there's so many sort of you can't say that people with autism don't have mental health problems, because they do.
Yeah.
But they just might need different type of therapy. But it isn't out there, and there's a lot of people that I know who've been crying out for help, and they don't get it, and then they stop trusting, that the help will come.
Yes, that's it. Absolutely. I mean, actually, one of the reports is saying that attendance drivers, sorry, are actually are intersectional. So, for example, pupils who are both pupil premium and SEND have lower attendance rates, and gender comes into that as well. They were saying that the difference is particularly stark for female pupil premium pupils, that's a tongue twister, with SEND between sort of year 9 and year 11. So you've got gender, age, SEND, pupil premium. I mean, there are so many factors to this, aren't they? So let's just have a little couple of minutes to think about that, and we will be back in a moment.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
So, big thank you to our sponsors for the show. Liz, we've got about 15 minutes left. I knew that this was going to go very quickly, but perhaps if we could just move on to, so what can we do? There is this government campaign and drive, and these things are being set up, but as educators and as people working with young people and pupils and so on, what can we actually do? So you've talked about one strategy already, and that was with your lovely dog. What's your dog called?
I've actually got two that have gone into schools. One's called Milo, and he's a cockapoo, and he was really, really well. He was such a positive. I used to call him my best teaching assistant. He'd come out. I'd have children arriving at the school who'd been out of school for a long time, and they'd sort of get stuck in their cars, and he'd come out and meet and greet at the cars, and then before you knew it, the children had taken the lead and they were being taken into school by them. So he was very good like that. But he and my other little dog called Russo, they are. It gives a diversion, a distraction from talking about the children, and they're very non-judgmental dogs. So we definitely had a group of children who basically came into school because they'd see the dogs, and I used them a lot right the way through the school. Times when teenagers had sort of gone back underneath their hoods and didn't want to talk to me, I'd sometimes just go and sit by them, and the dog would come and sit by them, and suddenly they were stroking the dog and we were talking about the dog, and the issue had gone. So I think I do believe in dogs in schools, but I will say that it's got to be the right dog, and there's got to be a really important relationship with the owner, and an understanding that dogs will get very tired. was very passionate about the welfare of my dogs as well as the welfare of the children. It's so important to realise how tiring it is when they've met, lots of people, and they're taking in some of that energy, that negative energy, I think. So dogs is one thing, but I think having a sort of consistent team, it's better than having one person to work with someone, because then if one person's away, you've got another person who might be able to come in and meet and greet them. I think the actual transition from home to school is difficult. So enabling that transition to work, so that people might be able to come in at a slightly later time when it's quieter, and get used to being in the school building before thinking that you're going to be learning. In my view, nobody can learn if you're not feeling emotionally safe. So you've got to focus on that safety before anything else, and really enable them to feel comfortable in an environment before you're expecting them to be in a situation where they might have to concentrate and learn. I also think, from the special school point of view, some of our children had to travel a very, very long way, and that was a barrier to their attendance. I had one girl who was travel sick and lived a good 45 minutes away in a vehicle, and that was a barrier to her attendance because she struggled to get into the car. And when she did arrive, she was feeling unwell. And to be told, someone should give her anti-sickness medication, well, that makes people sleepy. So there's lots of things. And I wouldn't want to, some of the children coming to the Austin Academy had a long journey. And yet, if they were coming, say if they got on a minibus, it might stop lots of times. So their journey that would normally take 20 minutes took an hour. And that's a good reason not to go. I wouldn't be wanting to commute a long way to work. And I think this is the same. So I think having opportunities to have small hubs in lots of different places would actually be, it's a big change from the big schools. And I know financially it isn't necessarily something that people think about, but I do think that attending a very large secondary school is hard for lots of children, especially if their primary school has been quite small, and the difference between a primary school education and secondary is huge. And a lot of people seem to be being diagnosed with autism quite late, so they don't get a diagnosis until maybe they're year 8, when they've been out of school for a year. And it might be that they're not, that their autism they managed at mainstream primary school because it was a safe environment. I think that there's got to be some listening going on. I really believe that there is a gap in the listening skills of educationalists when it comes to children, and their voices aren't always heard. So they're not encouraged to have self-advocacy, or if they are, people don't actually listen to them, and their views being really considered. And if they're being told, oh yes, tell me what's wrong, and then nothing happens, why would you think that it's worth telling anyone what's wrong?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's just so many children and young people are not happy at school to the extent that they're not going in. So until we actually ask why and listen to the answer and then do something, like, that's just not going to change, is it?
No, and school hasn't really changed. Apart from having an electronic whiteboard as opposed to a blackboard, a whiteboard with a pen. They're still sitting in rows looking at the front, and exams are still on paper. It doesn't make any sense to me, really. In fact, the world has changed so much. So that I think there's quite a lot of pedagogy that needs to be thought about. And instead of it sort of being, you're going to learn this lesson objective, really sort of looking at big questions and what are we going to find out today and how we're going to use all the technology that's available to us. So they're learning about technology and that it's interesting and you can use it in lots of different ways. And things like, radio podcasts and radio presentations. Why are we not looking more at those sort of ways of assessment? So and the other thing I'm quite passionate about as well. I did quite a lot of forest school at a school, one of the special schools I went to, and that was what I wrote my dissertation about when I was doing my special needs masters, about the power of outdoor education and how it then can impact on relationships within the classroom. I had a group of about 17-year 10s, and we'd take them to a local forestry commission forest school, and watching their interaction change from the quite negative interaction between some of the students, and then when they were having to do things together as a team, building things and being outside, it changed it really very, very powerfully, and it had a huge impact on them within the classroom as well. And I think this is, we need to be looking at how you could do more education that means that people feel comfortable with each other.
Yeah, that's really, really important, I think. I mean, one of the key sort of ways of increasing attendance, I think, has got to be that sense of belonging, that wanting to be there. So yeah, I think it's very interesting, to look at outdoor education and working together, and again, I suppose that creates a sense of belonging as well.
I think the other thing that is missing at the moment is a lack of there's so much to learn when people are doing teacher training. My daughter did a skit course and is now teaching music up in North London, and her special educational needs training was 2 hours one afternoon, which is not enough.
No, not at all. No.
So I think that actually looking at what we're teaching, what we're putting through to teachers, because there's a lot of communication skills and things like that, and realizing that children aren't being rude to you when some of the communication skills of people with autism are somewhat direct and can come across as being rude. But
Yeah.
so I think that actually there's lots of sort of aspects of education that if I could wave a magic wand, I would be looking at funding and giving much more education to all teachers to understand autism and those sort of mental health, sort of neurodiversity and their sensory needs, because the sensory needs, it actually affect everyone. I don't know about you, but if I'm tired and hungry, my sensory needs are different than if I'm not feeling. If I'm feeling happy, I can cope with lots of different things.
Absolutely.
And it can just be that a classroom is,
Oh, I think we might have lost you for a minute there, Liz. But yeah, totally agree. I think we're down to the same things as we often are, aren't we? It's time and money, and training, and then time to implement that as well. Yeah, I agree. If we could wave a magic wand and put all of those things in place, then yes, that would help. But yeah, I think the things that I've looked at of increasing attendance or removing or reducing those barriers. One of the things we touched on earlier was CAMS. So the waiting lists are incredibly long. And I think I know a lot of CAM services are extremely overstretched, and you will be they will be focusing on those that are in very high need or crisis. So I think things like CAMs are, they may not be able to see CAMs about this, and also teachers are extremely stretched as well. Everyone's workload is high. So thinking about some things that could be discussed or could be brought in, particularly around emotionally based school avoidance or SEN needs. things like helping children and young people recognise those, recognise how they're feeling or what's triggering those feelings of the anxiety. As we were saying, it could be sensory, it could be to do with a number of things. So it could be something coming up that day and that's causing them a lot of anxiety. Could be that it's a very, very busy environment that day, or, you know, as you said, Liz, they've been tried to come in and it's been met with thousands of people all moving around in a really busy building. So I think a really good starting point is recognizing, helping children to recognize and then talk about what it is that's causing those anxieties. I'm hoping, Liz, I think you've connected again.
Yes.
Excellent. So yeah, just for the last couple of minutes, have you got some tips, some ideas for anyone out there?
The other thing is children come in. Some children come in and they're very hungry. So
Yes.
I think giving them. I know that teenagers particularly get very hungry. So having opportunities for breakfast clubs and things like that, hugely important. And giving them safe spaces. So making sure there are places that if people feel overwhelmed that they can go to, and they're not closed, so that they are available when the children need it, not when there's someone to man it, if you understand what I mean. It's got to be somewhere where they can access at any point, not just at break time.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, like you said as well, that transition in from home to school is can be really difficult, very overwhelming. And you said earlier, you know, children cannot learn unless they're feeling emotionally safe, and having those other needs met as well. Like you said, it could be just hungry. Especially we refer back to that intersectionality about, you know, the impact on attendance and those barriers. So yeah, anything like breakfast clubs, safe spaces, trusted members of staff. I really liked what you said earlier about it being, you know, a team of trusted staff or more than one, basically, so that you've got that consistency if someone's off.
Sometimes things like school uniform are a barrier because they've got sensory issues in relating to their or even that they can't afford their school shoes or whatever it is. You know, I think there's elements now of poverty as well, but I particularly think that for some of the learners that I've been used to is that being able to wear jogging bottoms is a deal breaker as opposed to scratchy school trousers.
Yes, hoodies, like you said, because having, you know, that hood up can be, you know, a comfort, can't it? And poverty, you know, that even not just even buying the clothes, but washing them, those kind of things. They just all have such a wide ranging impact.
Schools got very strict rules about school uniform, and you haven't washed their school uniform, and they can't wear anything else, can they? So they can't go to school.
Yeah, exactly. Liz, it has been absolutely fantastic to talk to you about this. I mean, it is such a wide-ranging topic, isn't it? And it is, it's huge. But I believe it deserves a lot of talking about and thought beyond the kind of skiving, you know, or parents letting their children skive because they can't be bothered to send them in. I mean, I think there's just so many areas of this that need thinking about and discussing. But thank you so much for your time in coming in and talking about it. You know, I'm over on X and on LinkedIn and so on, and on the Teachers Talk Radio page. So if anybody wants to continue this conversation or has any thoughts, any top tips, things that have worked, absolutely love to carry on. And Liz, I'm sure you know, if we get anything, I'd be very happy to pass it on to you as well. Okay. But that's been brilliant, and I hope there's something in that helps anyone who's out there. And because I think as well, one of the impacts that we haven't talked about is the stress, the additional stress for teachers. If they've got people in their class, their tutor group, and so on, senior leaders, persistently absent children, it is additional stress and pressure on them as well, particularly if they are educators who think about these kind of issues. So, yeah, thank you all so much for listening. Thanks again, Liz. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.